All right then. So the murders in the Rue Morgue, as I just recently told y'all, but I need to tell it again because there's now a camera on me. We had 3 different parts of this. We're now in part 3. The first part that we were introduced with yesterday was the little information about what does it mean to be an analyst, to really analyze a situation. And we learned that that means being smart and thinking outside the box. Then we were introduced to a character who does this, and that was with our Auguste C. Dupin. And we got introduced to him and how he analyzes the nameless narrator, and it freaks him out. Then, that was part 2. Part 3 was when they were introduced to the murders in the Rue Morgue, when they were reading through the paper and they realized, oh, look at what's happened. So that is where we're picking up today, right after there were 2 murders. How were they both murdered? Y'all remember from yesterday?
One was stuffed up the chimney.
Yeah, that's right. One was stuffed up the chimney, and she had gouges taken out of her throat, as if nails had really held on to her. What about the other one?
She had her neck was cut so bad that it was her head fell off or something.
Yeah, her head nearly was basically it fell off, and they tried to stand her up. Have you ever seen Harry Potter, Nearly Headless Nick? That's what you can assume. All right, there, her neck just flopped over on itself. So that is where we are picking up today. Right after that, we get this little line. The next day's paper had these additional particulars. So we're getting extra information here. The tragedy in the Rue Morgue, many individuals have been examined in relation to this most extraordinary and frightful affair. The word affair has not yet in France that levity of import which it conveys with us. But nothing whatever has transpired to throw light upon. We give below all the material testimony elicited. So, right here, this actually is a really interesting line that we have here. Okay? Because this is a little note given to us by our nameless narrator. Remember, we don't know his name. He only uses the word I in reference to himself. Or I guess technically, or herself. But notice here, the word affair has not yet, in France, that levity of import which it conveys with us. All right? So we can assume a couple things here. Because of the word us, and because we know who is writing this, Edgar Allan Poe, we can go ahead and start assuming a couple things. One, that this narrator is more than likely Edgar Allan Poe himself. 2, the us is more than likely referring to us Americans, since he was an American himself. Now, when it comes to the murders in the Rue Morgue, they have all the testimonies given to them by people. All the testimonies, all the material testimony elicited. Pauline Dubourg, laundress, deposes that she has known both the deceased for 3 years, having washed for them during that period. The old lady and her daughter seemed on good terms, very affectionate towards each other. They were excellent pay. Could not speak in regard to their mode of means of living. Believed that Madame L. told fortunes for a living. Was reputed to have money put by. Never met any persons in the house when she called for the clothes or took them home. Was sure that they had no servant in employ. There appeared to be no furniture in any part of the building except in the 4th story. All right, so we get a little information there. And plus, we get what this is supposed to be. This is literally just taken from this Pauline Dubourg, who is a laundress. That means she works with cleaning clothes. That's what laundresses do. So she cleans clothes for a living. We also get a little bit of information about kind of the people that have been killed, the 2 Jane Does, we'll call them, the madam and her daughter. We do get a little bit of information here about Madame L. She's believed to have told fortunes for a living. Thank you very much. Was reputed to have money put by, which we found out is true. She does have money put by. Remember, yesterday they found a massive 2 bags of money worth up to 4,000 francs of gold. That's a lot of money, all right? You're actually sitting in the back now. You, next to Lakayla, thank you. We do know that this is true, at the very least. We do know that she had money put by. We do not know if she told fortunes for a living yet. And it's kind of strange that there was no furniture at all in the house except in the store that they lived. Every other story was completely blank. That's kind of strange. We have the next one, Pierre Moreau. I feel bad if your name is Pierre Moreau. I probably had just ruined your name. Pierre Moreau, tobacconist, deposes that he has been in the habit of selling small quantities of tobacco and snuff to Madame L. Espagne for nearly 4 years. Was born in the neighborhood and has always resided there. The deceased and her daughter had occupied the house in which the corpses were found for more than 6 years. It was formerly occupied by a jeweler who underlet the upper rooms to various persons. The house was the property of Madame L. She became dissatisfied with the abuse of the premises by her tenant and moved into them herself, refusing to let any portion. The old lady was childish. Witnesses had seen the daughter some 5 or 6 times during the 6 years. The two lived an exceedingly retired life, were reputed to have money, had heard it said among the neighbors that Madame L. told fortunes, did not believe it, had never seen any person into the door except the old lady and her daughter, a porter once or twice, and a physician some 8 or 10 times. Okay, so a little bit more information from this tobacconist, which I guess you can kind of tell what he does. He sells tobacco. It tells us right here. In the habit of selling small quantities of tobacco and snuff to Madam for nearly 4 years. All right. We see that they have been living here for more than 6 years. And we get why she did not let anyone else all right, she refusing to let any portion. That means she refused to rent out any portion to anyone. She just kept it for herself. And he claims the old lady was childish. Kind of an interesting point there. We get another 2 pieces of information that we saw in the before. They were reputed to have money. We see that for the second time now. And we have that she more than likely told fortunes, though this guy, Pierre, did not believe it. So again, we have the same information twice, reported by 2 different people. We do get a little bit more information about how long they lived there and why they lived there, but we still have those 2 as well. It's kind of interesting whenever we have multiple uses of the same exact piece of information. Many other persons, neighbors, gave evidence to the same effect. No one was spoken of as frequenting the house. It was not known whether there were any living connections of Madame L. and her daughter. The shutters of the front windows were seldom opened. Those in the rear were always closed, with the exception of the large back room, 4th story. The house was a good house, not very old. All right, so a little bit more information there. That apparently a lot more people said the same exact thing, gave evidence to the same effect. No one was spoken of as frequenting the house. It was not known whether they were living connections of Madame L. and her daughter. And that's an interesting point here, too. The shutters, the front windows, were seldom opened. We don't really have shutters anymore in our day and age, but shutters used to be really important. Instead of having blinds, you would just have the window and then shutters on the outside, and you would close the shutters if there was a storm, or if you wanted to lock up your house, you would shut the shutters and lock them, things like that. The only shutters that were ever opened were the ones in the back room on the 4th story. That's kind of an interesting point to make, and probably something to remember. Isidore Mousset, I am so sorry, gendarme, deposes that he was called to the house about 3 o'clock in the morning and found some 20 or 30 persons at the gateway, endeavoring to gain admittance. Forced it open at length with a bayonet, not with a crowbar. Had but little difficulty in getting it open on account of its being a double or folding gate, and bolted neither at bottom nor top. The shrieks were continued until the gate was forced and then suddenly ceased. They seemed to be screams of some person or persons in great agony, were loud and drawn out, not short and quick. Witnesses led the way upstairs. Upon reaching the first landing, heard two voices in loud and angry contention. The one a gruff voice, the other much smaller, shriller, a very strange voice. Could distinguish some words of the former, which was that of a Frenchman. Was positive that it was not a woman's voice. Could distinguish the words sacre and diable. Diable, could be. The shrill voice of that was that of a foreigner. Could not be sure whether it was the voice of a man or a woman. Could not make out what was said, but believed the language to be Spanish. The state of the room and of the bodies was described by this witness as we described them yesterday. So now we actually get a lawman. I'm pretty sure I'm ruining there how to pronounce it, but they say gendarme. I'll just say that. So we get an actual lawman. And because he's a lawman, we also notice that his tone of speech, his way of speaking, his diction, his word choice is very direct and to the point. There is no colorful language here. It's just straight, I'm doing my job. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. That's what we get, the effect that we get when it comes to Isidore Musette. It's going to be the lawman who came over. We see more evidence of that, as I said, with how direct and firm his language is. There is very little color to what he says. He just corrects the fact. He just states the facts and corrects whatever facts were wrong as he keeps going. I want you to start thinking about how people speak a little bit more as we go. Keeping it going with this list of people who are sharing what they saw. Henry Duval, a neighbor and by trade a silversmith, that means someone who works with silversmith, not very difficult there, deposes that he was one of the party who first entered the house. Corroborates the testimony of Musette in general. As soon as they forced an entrance, they reclosed the door to keep out the crowd, which collected very fast, notwithstanding the lateness of the hour. The shrill voice, the witness thinks, was that of an Italian, which was certainly, it was not French. Okay, so first we had the shrill voice. First it said that they were Spanish. Now we're getting that he thinks it was an Italian. That's kind of a strange, that's rather a large difference whenever you're really hearing them side by side. But he was certain that this voice, this shrill voice that no one could, that sounds like a foreigner to everyone, was not French for sure. All right? Could not be sure that it was a man's voice. It might have been a woman's. Was not acquainted with the Italian language. Could not distinguish the words. But was convinced by the intonation that the speaker was an Italian. Knew Madame L. and her daughter. Okay, so this guy actually knew, Henry Duval knew the woman and her daughter. Had conversed with both frequently. Was sure that the shrill voice was not that of either of the deceased. Odenheimer restaurateur. This witness volunteered his testimony, not speaking French, was examined through an interpreter, is a native of Amsterdam, was passing at the house at the time of the shrieks. They lasted for several minutes, probably 10. They were long and loud, very awful and distressing. Was one of those who entered the building, corroborated the previous evidence in every respect, but one. Ooh. So he backed up, he corroborated, he agreed with, backed up is an easy way to put it. He backed up all the other evidence, said it was true, but there was one piece of evidence that he changed. Was sure that the shrill voice was that of a man, of a Frenchman. Okay. Now this guy from Amsterdam thinks it was a Frenchman. We have no idea where this shrill voice came from. Could not distinguish the words uttered. They were loud and quick, unequal. spoken apparently in fear as well as in anger. That's kind of a surprising thing. Have you ever been both angry and scared at the same time? You may have noticed whenever you try to talk like that, your voice does get a little strange. The voice was harsh, not so much shrill as harsh. Could not call it a shrill voice. The gruff voice said repeatedly, Sacre, Diable, and once, Mon Dieu. Alright? So, this shrill voice said a lot of things, but no one knows what type of language they were speaking. Was it Spanish, Italian, French? No one knows. But this Odenheimer, this native of Amsterdam, this is our next witness, said that he thinks the gruff, low voice repeatedly said these three words: Sacre, Diable, and Mon Dieu. I don't even know if I'm saying those correctly. French language, man. Jules Bigard, Mignard? Jules M., banker of the firm of Mignard and Fils Rue Delorraine, ooh, man, French people, is the elder Mignard. Madame Espanier had some property. Okay? So, now apparently we're going to go to talking to her banker, essentially. She had opened an account with his baking house in the spring of the year, 8 years previously. Made frequent deposits in small sums, had checked for nothing until the third day before her death, when she took out in person the sum of 4,000 francs. The sum was paid in gold, and a clerk sent home with the money. So, this is always a bit shady. Let's make sure our phones are put away. Thank you very much. This is always a little bit shady. When someone dies, and right before they die, they pull out of their bank account a large sum of money. That's always a little bit shady right there. But we do have it here when she did this. I checked nothing in until the third day before her death, when she took out in person the sum of 4,000 francs. Adolphe Lebon, clerk to Migon, or the banker, deposes that on the day in question, about noon, he accompanied Madame L'Espanaye to her residence with the 4,000 francs, put up in 2 bags upon the door being opened. Upon the door being opened, Mademoiselle L. appeared and took from his hands one of the bags, while the old lady relieved him of the other. He then bowed and departed. Did not see any person in the street at the time. It was a by-street, very lonely. So, we see that on the day that she pulled out the 4,000 francs, the clerk, the one who walked the money to her house, saw them, both, Madame L'Espanaye and the Mademoiselle. And they took the money from him. So we have a visual witness of them on that day. And also they leave off with this section here. It was a by-street, very lonely. That tells us a little bit of information about the street itself. Now, we know this is in Paris, and Paris is a crowded, large city, but a by-street is like a side street. It's a street that not many people will walk on. So, this is going to be that very lonely section. It's going to be really important. Remember, these people who were murdered are 2 women living alone. And plus, they just took up the sum of 4,000 francs, which I don't believe that we have ever actually figured out how much 4,000 francs is. So let's do that briefly. All we got to do is go to Google. France inflation from 1850. Here you go. It's euro. Old French franc. There we go. Start date. Let's go way, way, way back to 1901. That's as far as we can go back. Let's go with 4,000. What would that mean? That would be, oh, wow, okay. That would be $1,066,836 in current day. Yeah, in current day. French money. So think about that's like they just pulled out $1 million, a little over $1 million, and we're just chilling with that in their house. Not exactly the best place to have that. All right. Next person, though, who is on the list of people who talked to the newspaper, William Byrd, tailor. What's a tailor do? Anyone know?
Don't they like do your like clothes or something?
Yes, they create and handle clothing. All right. They can create dresses, shirts, clothing. Yeah. They still have tailors today, even if you go to, I know for a guy at least, if you go to a suit shop, they usually have an in-house tailor who will tailor your clothes for you. William Byrd, tailor, deposes that he was one of the party who entered the house, is an Englishman. Okay, so we have an Englishman now. Has lived in Paris for 2 years, was one of the first to ascend the stairs, heard the voices in contention, or in anger, and angry at each other. The gruff voice is that of a Frenchman. Could make out several words, but cannot now remember all. Heard distinctly sacré and non Dieu. There was a sound at the moment as if of several persons struggling, a scraping and scuffling sound. The shrill voice was very loud, louder than the gruff one. It's sure that it was not the voice of an Englishman. Appeared to be that of a German. Might have been a woman's voice. Does not understand German. So now we have an Englishman who is in the picture. No longer any French or Amsterdam people who believed that this was a German. Thinks that shrill voice was possibly German. Either way, what we're getting at here, we're going to probably end up going through a few more, is that no one knows where this shrill voice came from. Everyone heard the gruff, deep voice say those three words. Sacré and mon Dieu and, well, there's one other word up there. But everyone heard that. Everyone heard those French words coming from this gruff voice. But no one knows what the shrill voice was talking about or what, language it was talking. If we keep going, we have 4 of the above named witnesses being recalled. Deposed at the door of the chamber in which was found the body of Mademoiselle L. was locked on the inside when the party reached it. Everything was perfectly silent. No groans or noises of any kind. All right. Remember Mademoiselle L? She's the younger daughter. She was the one stuffed up the chimney. That was the one that was stuffed up the chimney, who had gouges in her throat, on her throat, as if she was choked to death. And in that room, it was all very quiet. No groans or noises of any kind. And that's kind of a strange shoot. It was locked on the inside when the party reached it. Strange. Upon forcing the door, no person was seen. The windows, both at the back and the front, were down and firmly fastened from within. A door between the 2 rooms was closed, but not locked. The door leading from the front room into the passage was locked, with the key on the inside. A small room in the front of the house on the 4th story at the head of the passage was open, the door being ajar. This room was crowded with old beds, boxes, and so forth. These were carefully removed and searched. There was not an inch of any portion of the house which was not carefully searched. So, if we are following this correctly, they walked up the stairs. All right, let's say that these are the stairs here. I'm not very good at being an artist. Don't laugh at me too much. Here's our door. Upon forcing the door open, they forced this door open. No person was seen. The windows, both the back and front, were down and firmly fastened. So the windows in here were firmly fastened shut. Let's say that these are our windows here. They are shut. They are locked from the inside. There is a doorway, though, this way. A door between the two rooms, so we have another room over here, was closed but not locked. So this door is locked. I'm sorry, is unlocked but just closed. A door between the two rooms is closed but not locked. The door leading from the front room into the passage was locked with the key on the inside. Okay, so this door here was locked and they have the key here as well. I'm really bad at this, at writing, drawing. A small room in the front of the house in the fourth story at the end of the passage was open, the door being ajar. This room was covered with old beds. So they had another room at the end of all this, somewhere right here. And this room, the door was ajar, was open. Okay? And it was filled to the brim with boxes and stuff. I'm just trying to make sure that you have some type of mental image of what they're talking about. There was not an inch of any portion of the house which was not carefully searched. Sweeps were sent up and down the chimneys after they already found the dead body in one of them. The house was four-story one with garrets, or mansards. A trap door on the roof was nailed down very securely, did not appear to have been opened for years. The time elapsing between the hearing of the voices in contention, or in anger, and the breaking open of the room door was variously stated by the witnesses. Some made it as short as 3 minutes, some as long as 5. The door was opened with difficulty. So, this door, whenever they all walked up to it, some people said it took them 3 minutes to get to the fourth story, some said it took 5 minutes. You can do a lot in those little bit of time, all right? Just ask a student who has not finished their homework and needs to get it turned in before the teacher walks up to them, all right? You can get a lot done in just a few minutes. Next person, Alfonso Garcia, undertaker, deposes that he resides in the Rue Morgue. So he's a neighbor. Is a native of Spain, was one of the party who entered the house. Did not proceed upstairs. Is nervous and was apprehensive of the consequences of agitation. So this guy, he's a neighbor, he was there, but he didn't go upstairs because getting, angry, having contention makes him a bit nervous. So he just didn't go up there. Heard the voices in contention. The gruff voice was that of a Frenchman, okay? Could not distinguish what was said. The shrill voice was that of an Englishman. Is sure of this. And does not understand the English language, but judges by the intonation. So now we have another language thrown into the mix. Maybe this guy was French. Maybe he was Spanish. Maybe he was Italian, or maybe he was English. We have no idea now. We have now hit almost every single major European language. It doesn't help that there's a melting pot of people here. We have this guy who is from Spain. We have a guy from Amsterdam. We have an Englishman. We have a couple Frenchmen. And they all are saying something different whenever it comes to the shrill voice. Alberto Tani, confectioner. Ooh, this is going to be your best friend, ladies and gents. You want to know a confectioner. Know why? What do you think a confectioner works with? It's kind of a very direct word. If you didn't know it already, you might not guess it. It's not an easy thing. A confectioner actually works with baking like sweets. So you want to know a confectioner, okay? Someone who bakes sweets. They may also bake bread and stuff, but that's a baker. But a confectioner works usually with sweets. That's a good friend to have right there. So we have this confectioner named Alberto. He poses that he was among the first to ascend the stairs. And so he was with the Englishman up there. Heard the voices in question. The gruff voice was that of a Frenchman. We've discussed that. We've already established it. Distinguished several words. The speaker appeared to be expositating. Could not make out the words of the shrill voice. Spoke quickly and unevenly. Thinks it was the voice of a Russian. Oh my goodness. So it's not French. A lot of people thought it was French. It's not Italian. A person thought it was Italian voice. It's not English. It's not Spanish. And all of a sudden we think it could be possibly Russian. Have you ever heard Russian speak? The Russian language? It sounds nothing like English. You have all heard English before. I'd be really worried if you hadn't. Okay? But it sounds nothing like French. If you've never heard a French person speak, it sounds nothing like Italian when you really get into it. All right? The only languages that sound somewhat similar would be Italian and Spanish. Those are the only ones that sound even vaguely familiar. But French, it sounds nothing like English, sounds nothing like Russian. It doesn't really connect. Heck, especially English and Russian have completely different base languages. French, Spanish, and Italian all have Latin roots at least, but we have no idea now. Paul Dumas, physician. So this guy's a doctor. Deposes that he was called to view the bodies about daybreak. So especially when it comes to a doctor here, you're going to have a very clinical way of seeing things. That's what they should do whenever we have this description. Notice how also it's pretty long in comparison to some of the others, because doctors know what it means to have all the information. So they give you everything that they can. They're very direct, especially when it comes to the description of the bodies, which is never super fun. The physician deposes that he was called to view the bodies about daybreak. They were both then lying on the sacking of the bedstead in the chamber where Mademoiselle L was found. So they're back in the room where Mademoiselle L, the one who was stuck in the chimney, is. The corpse of the young lady was much bruised and excoriated. So she was bruised up and scratched, remember? The fact that it had been thrust in the chimney would sufficiently account for these appearances. The throat was greatly chafed. There were several deep scratches just below the chin, together with a series of livid spots, which were evidently the impression of fingers. The face was fearfully discolored, and the eyeballs protruded. Ooh. There's a guy on AGT, America's Got Talent, who is famous for sticking his eyeballs out. That's what you can imagine, all right? The tongue had been partially bitten through. Oh, so her tongue was, she must have been screaming so loud, and she must have got hit on the bottom of her chin, cut through her tongue. A large bruise was discovered upon the pit of the stomach, produced apparently by the presence of by the pressure of a knee. So apparently she had been choked on the ground, and a knee was pressed into her stomach. In the opinion of Mr. Dumas, our physician, Mademoiselle L. Espagnier, the older lady, had been throttled to death by some person or persons unknown. The corpse of the mother was horribly mutilated. All the bones of the right leg and arm were more or less shattered. Goodness gracious. So all the bones in her right arms, is what they said? Yeah, right leg and arm were completely shattered. Completely. That takes a lot of effort. The left tibia, much splintered, as well as the ribs of the left side. Whole body dreadfully bruised and discolored. It was not possible to say how the injuries had been inflicted. A heavy club of wood or a broad bar of iron, a chair, any large, heavy, and obtuse weapon have produced such results. Notice here that clinical way of speaking of all those descriptions of the bodies themselves, and also the hypothesis at the end shows us this really is a doctor, that use of language. If wielded by the hands of a very powerful man, no woman could have inflicted the blows with any weapon. The head of the deceased had been by witnesses, when seen by witnesses, was entirely separated from the body, and was also greatly shattered. The throat had evidently been cut with some very sharp instrument, probably with a razor. In the very beginning, when they walked in, they did see a razor covered in blood. Notice here also, I don't want to get step on anyone's toes. It says no woman could have inflicted the blows with any weapon, just because, generally speaking, men are stronger than women. And especially if you think about it in this time period, this is written around the 1850s or so, a little bit before that. So just think about how women were treated during that time. Next section is going to be by a surgeon now. So someone closely related to a doctor, a surgeon. Alexander Etienne, surgeon, was called with Mr. Dumas to view the bodies, corroborated the testimony and the opinions of Mr. Dumas. Nothing farther of importance was elicited through several other persons were examined. A murder so mysterious and so perplexing in all its particulars was never before committed in Paris. If indeed a murder has been committed at all, the police are entirely at fault, an unusual occurrence in affairs of this nature. There is not, however, a shadow of a clue apparent. Okay. And that's where we get the end of the paper there. We can even, if we want to, make sure to point that out. End of paper. Newspaper. We're going to go back into our two characters. We have our nameless narrator and C. Augustus Dupin. The evening edition of the paper stated that the greatest excitement continued in the quarter St. Roch, that the premises in question had been carefully researched and fresh examinations of witnesses instituted, but all to no purpose. A postscript, however, mentioned that Adolphe Le Bon had been arrested and imprisoned, although nothing appeared to incriminate him beyond the facts already detailed. Hold on, who is Adolphe? That's an unfortunate name for today. Adolphe Le Bon, he was found way, way back up here. It's Alberto, Alfonso, William, Adolphe Le Bon. He was a clerk. Remember, he was the clerk who brought the money to their house. Why would he be incriminated? If you had 2 bags of money, like massive $1 million in your hands, all right, and you took it to someone's house and gave it to them, and you were the last person to see them alive, that's kind of incriminating right there. That's kind of at least be really worrying at the very least. You might need to be like, I didn't do nothing, okay? Yeah, right. So it looks really suspicious that he was the last one to see them. Dupin seemed singularly interested in the progress of this affair, at least so I judged him from his manner, for he made no comments. It was only after the announcement that Le Bon had been imprisoned that he asked me my opinion respecting the murders. I can merely agree with all Paris in considering them an insoluble mystery. I saw no means by which it would be possible to trace the murderer. There we go, in case you never knew what that word means, we actually have the answer here. It would be, I saw no means by which it would be possible to trace the murder. If you never knew what that word means, insoluble, there you go. We must not judge of the means, said Dupin. By this shell of examination, the Parisian police, so much extolled for acumen, are cunning, but no more. There is no method in their proceedings beyond the method of the moment. They make a vast parade of measures, but not unfrequently. These are so ill adapted to the objects proposed as to put us in mind of Monsieur Jourdain's calling for his robe de chambre. Pour me entree, French. I told you, whenever we come across a French phrase, I'm just not going to be able to do it, all right? I'm just going to screw it up. So he claims here that the Parisian police have a method, but their method is smart, it's cunning, he says, but it does not encapsulate all that they need. They don't really think outside the box. They only think on the moment. So let's make sure that we are pointing that out. He agrees the French police, the Parisian police, the police are smart and cunning, but they think in the moment. He says right there. They cannot move beyond the method of the moment. So, because of that, their measures, their ways of doing things is just a little bit lacking. The results attained by them are not unfrequently surprising, but for the most part are brought about by simple diligence and activity. They're not impressive. They're not They don't have a good imagination at all. They are methodical in what they do, which is true. Detectives are methodical. If they don't know how to solve a crime, they don't know the answer to it right away, they have to take the time and go step by step, simple clue by simple clue. So they work with diligence and activity. When these qualities are unavailing, their schemes fail. Vidocq, for example, was a good guesser and a persevering man. But without educated thought, he cried continually by the very intensity of his investigations. He impaired his vision by holding the object too close. He might see perhaps 1 or 2 points with unusual clearness, but in so doing, he necessarily lost sight of the matter as a whole. So it's like the police sit there like this and look at it. What's happened right here? But they don't take a step back and see the entire picture. Thus, there is such a thing as being too profound. Truth is not always in a well. In fact, as regards the more important knowledge, I do believe that she is invariably superficial. She, we have another use of personification here, is important knowledge. Is knowledge. The depth lies in the valleys where we seek her. Another, again, we see that connection and that continuation of the personification. And not upon the mountaintops where she is found. The modes and sources of this kind of error are well typified in the contemplation of the heavenly bodies. To look at a star by glances, to view it in sidelong way, by turning toward it the exterior portions of the retina, more susceptible of feeble impressions of light than the interior, is to behold the star distinctly. It is to have the best appreciation of its luster, a luster which grows dim just in proportion as we turn our vision fully upon it. All that to say, he's saying a bunch of words here, but what he's getting at is that the police and most other people who try to solve these types of crimes look too closely at the small, tiny clues. They blind themselves with them. Instead, they should take a step back, use their imagination to see the full picture. That's what he's saying. And he's using a couple of different references to get to that point. He references this character, this guy named right here. Let's get there. Vidocq. And he explains how he used to cry. He used to be really smart, but he used to cry about not being able to see the entire picture. He talks about how knowledge, the truth, is usually found in the mountaintops, way up high, but people are always looking down for it in the valleys. So he's saying that people are looking in the wrong place. And then he uses the third example here is the stars. He says you need to actually use the peripherals of your eyes to see the stars, not just your retinas. And he finishes up by finishing that thought up. A greater number of rays actually fall upon the eye in the latter case when you use your peripherals. But in the former, when you use your retinas, there is more refined capacity for comprehension. By undue profundity, we perplex and enfeeble thought, and it is possible to make even Venus herself vanish from the firmament by scrutiny too sustained, too concentrated, or too direct. Basically, make sure that you're just seeing the whole picture and not just looking too direct at one thing. As for these murders, let us enter into some examinations for ourselves before we make up an opinion respecting them. An inquiry will afford us amusement. This right here is a point showcased to us by Sherlock Holmes earlier the last couple weeks. Sherlock Holmes does his job. He consults. He's a consulting detective, or whatever you want to call it, because he's bored constantly. He wants to have some type of stimulation to his brain. So he solves mysteries and crimes because he finds it fun. This is another connection we have to Sherlock Holmes. Remember, this story was written 50 years before Sherlock Holmes was even created. This is the basis, this is one of those identifiers of Sherlock Holmes that I believe Sir Arthur Conan Doyle pulled from this story. I thought this an odd term, so applied, but said nothing. So, even our narrator, whenever Auguste Dupin said that this would be an amusing thing to do, he thought it was kind of strange, but he just kept going with it. And besides, Le Bon once rendered me a service for which I am not ungrateful. We will go and see the premises with our own eyes. I know G, the prefect of police, and shall have no difficulty in obtaining the necessary permission. So notice here again, we have some more sections taken from that we can see in a connection to Sherlock Holmes. We see him doing things for people who have rendered him service. We also know he knows the prefect of police, so he can get access to the crime scene. Another common point that with Sherlock Holmes has. The prefect, we could tie this to Lestrade. Work for others. This paragraph is so small, but it showcases us the connection to Sherlock Holmes so well. Just a few days, or maybe even a few moments, we don't really get a time, after this, the permission was obtained, and we proceeded at once to the Rue Morgue. This is one of those miserable thoroughfares which intervene between the Rue Rochelet and the Rue Saint-Roch. It was late in the afternoon when we reached it. At this quarter, it is a great distance from that in which we resided, so they are on the opposite side of town. The house was readily found, for there were still many persons gazing up at the closed shutters. With an objectless curiosity, from the opposite side of the way, it was an ordinary Parisian house, with a gateway on one side of which was glazed watchbox with a sliding way on one C-panel in the window, indicating a loge de concierge. So a concierge is someone who will sit there and direct you to where you need to go. Before going in, we walked up the street, turned down an alley, and then again, turning, passed in the rear of the building. Dupin, meanwhile, examining the whole neighborhood, as well as the house, with a minuteness of attention for which I could see no possible object. Retracing our steps, we came again to the front of the dwelling, rang, and having shown our credentials, were admitted by the agents in charge. So notice here, what they do. They go over to the house. They see there's still a bunch of people up in the front. They see there's a concierge. They look at the front of the house and see it, describe it. Then they start walking around the neighborhood. It says they walk down an alleyway, then take another left, down another alleyway, so they can walk up to the back of the house, so they can see every single detail of the house and the buildings around it. They finally get inside. We went upstairs into the chamber where the body of Mademoiselle L'Espanaye had been found, and there where both the deceased still lay. They were still there. This is so how close it was. It was probably more than just a day, if that. The disorders of the room had, as usual, been suffered to exist. I saw nothing beyond what had been stated in the Gazette des Tribunaux. Dupin scrutinized everything, not excepting the bodies of the victims. We then went into the other rooms and into the yard. A gendarme, the police officer, accompanying us throughout. The examination occupied us until dark, when we took our departure. On our way home, my companion stopped in for a moment at the office of one of the daily papers. So, they go in to visit this place, and really, our narrator sees nothing different than what was already in the papers already. He didn't see anything different. I have said that the whims of my friend were manifold, and that Phalas Menagius, for the phrase where there is no English equivalent, it was his humor now to decline all conversation on the subject of the murder, until about noon the next day. He then asked me suddenly if I had observed any other thing peculiar at the scene of the atrocity. So, this guy takes a full day, essentially. He says that they got finished with observing the house at night, and that he didn't say anything about the murder until the next day at noon. So that's about a solid, 12, let's say, probably 15 hours at most, that he didn't say anything about the murder. This is something, again, tying us to Sherlock Holmes, who says he needs time to think by himself to solve an issue, to solve a crime. Same thing we're seeing here. And all of a sudden he asked him if he noticed anything peculiar at the scene of the atrocity. There was something in his manner of emphasizing the word peculiar, which caused me to shudder, without knowing why. No, nothing peculiar, I said. Nothing more, at least, than we both saw stated in the paper. The Gazette, he replied, has not entered, I fear, into the unusual horror of the thing. But dismiss the idle opinions of this print. It appears to me that this mystery is considered insoluble, for the very reason which should cause it to be regarded as easy of solution. I mean, for the ultra character of its features. The police are confounded by the seeming absence of motive itself. Not for the murder itself, but for the atrocity of the murder. Because the money was what you would think would be the reason why. But why would you go out and just literally cut someone's head off? That's kind of a bit extreme. They are puzzled, too, by the seeming impossibility of reconciling the voices heard in contention with the facts that no one was discovered upstairs with the assassinated Mademoiselle L'Espagne, and that there were no means of egress without the notice of the party ascending. The wild disorder of the room, the corpse thrust with the head downward up the chimney, the frightful mutilation of the body of the old lady. These considerations, with those just mentioned, and others which I need not mention, have suffered to paralyze the powers, by putting completely at fault the boasted acumen of the government agents. So, all the police, the government agents, are completely baffled by the case. They have fallen into the gross but common error of confounding the unusual with the abstruse. But it is by these deviations from the plane of the ordinary that reason feels its way, if at all, in its search for the true. So we can actually tell the truth, figure out what happened, because of how unordinary this thing is. In investigations such as we are now pursuing, it should not be so much asked what has occurred as what has occurred that has never occurred before. In fact, the facility with which I shall arrive, or have arrived, at the solution of this mystery is in the direct ratio of its apparent insolubility in the eyes of the police. So he is claimed to have solved it right here. Dupin has claimed to have solved it. He has not solved it just with the facts of the case, but with how crazy and how interesting, how unordinary the facts of the case are. That's what he has stated. I stared at the speaker in mute astonishment. Of course, if someone came up and said, "Hey, I know who the Zodiac Killer is," that was a famous killer who has never been caught. People think he was caught, but no one knows. Well, then that'd be pretty impressive, all right? You would probably be astonished, hopefully, Oh, yeah, it doesn't seem like y'all know who the Zodiac Killer is. After making this statement and shocking our nameless narrator, he states, "I am now awaiting," continued he, looking toward the door of our apartment. "I am now awaiting a person who, although perhaps not the perpetrator of these butcheries, must have been in some measure implicated in their perpetration. Of the worst portion of the crimes committed, it is probable that he is innocent. I hope that I am right in this supposition, for upon it I build my expectation of reading the entire riddle. I look for the man here, in this room, every moment. It is true that he may not arrive, but the probability is that he will. Should he come, it will be necessary to detain him. Here are pistols, and we both know how to use them when occasion demands their use." Whoa! So they go home, and he tells them, "Yeah, I solved the riddle. I solved the case. Who killed him?" And he's actually going to come over here soon. He might be a little bit dangerous. I'm pretty sure he didn't kill, do all the mutilations, but he might be dangerous. So here's a gun. What if you walked in here one day and I said, "Hey, sit down, quick, here's a machine gun. Shoot anyone who comes to the door." You might be a little bit shocked for a little bit. Same thing here, right? I took the pistols, because why not just have one, have two? I believe this guy's an American, because he really likes guns. I took the pistols, scarcely knowing what I did or believing what I heard, while Dupin went on, very much as if in a soliloquy, or by himself making a speech. I have already spoken of this abstract manner which, at such times. His discourse was addressed to myself, but his voice, although by no means loud, had that intonation which is commonly employed in speaking to someone at a great distance. His eyes vacant in expression regarded only the wall. So this guy, the whole time he's explaining this, he's just staring at the wall as he's talking. And he just gave his friend here guns to make sure to stop anyone who walks into the door. So again, super strange things going on here. This guy is really smart, but also really strange. Now the voices heard in contention, he said, by the party upon the stairs were not the voices of the women themselves, was fully proved by the evidence. So the voices, the gruff one and the high-pitched shrill one, were not the women. This relieves us of all doubt upon the question whether the old lady could have first destroyed the daughter, and afterward have committed suicide. I speak of this point chiefly for the sake of method, for the strength of Madame l'Espanaye would have been utterly unequal to the task of thrusting her daughter's corpse up the chimney, as it was found. So the old lady could not have killed her daughter, because she's not strong enough to shove a whole body up a chimney. That's a really impressive feat. And the nature of the wounds upon her own person entirely preclude the idea of self-destruction. You can't cut your own head off. I don't think. No one tried that. Murder, then, has been committed by some third party, and the voices of this third party were those heard in contention. Let me now advert not to the whole testimony respecting these voices, but to what was peculiar in that testimony. Did you observe anything peculiar about it? Remember the 5 different types of voices it could have been? I remarked that while all the witnesses agreed in supposing the gruff voice to be that of a Frenchman, there was much disagreement in regarding to the shrill, or as one individual termed it, the harsh voice. That was the evidence itself, said Dupin. But it was not the peculiarity of the evidence. You observed nothing distinctive. Yet there was something to be observed. The witnesses, as you remark, agreed about the gruff voice. They were here unanimous, or they were all in agreement. But in regard to the shrill voice, the peculiarity is not that they disagreed, but that while an Italian, an Englishman, a Spaniard, a Hollander, and a Frenchman attempted to describe it, each one spoke of it as that of a foreigner. Each is sure that it was not the voice of his own countrymen. That's true. Each likens it not to the voice of an individual of any nation with whose language he is conversant, with the converse. So every single, the Englishman thought it was a Frenchman, the Italian thought it was a Russian, the Spaniard thought it was an Italian, the Hollander thought it was someone else, the Frenchman thought it was someone else. No one said it was their own language being spoken. The Frenchman supposes the voices of a Spaniard and might have distinguished some words that he had acquainted with in Spanish. The Dutchman maintains it to have been that of a Frenchman, but we find it stated that not understanding French, this witness was examined through an interpreter. The Englishman thinks it the voice of a German, but does not understand German. The Spaniard is sure that it was that of an Englishman, but judges by the intonation altogether, as he has no knowledge of the English. The Italian believes it is the voice of a Russian, but has never conversed with a native of Russia. A second Frenchman differs, moreover, with the first, and is positive that the voice was that of an Italian, but not being cognizant of that tongue, is, like the Spaniard, convinced by the intonation. Now, how strangely unusual must that voice have really been, about which such testimony as this could have been elicited, in whose tones even denizens of the 5 great divisions of Europe could recognize nothing familiar. You will say that it might have been the voice of an Asiatic or an African. Neither the Asiatics nor Africans abound in Paris, but without denying the inference, I will now merely call your attention to 3 points. So, all that, he breaks it all down, who said what, who thought it was what type of language. Now we're finally breaking it down. He said no one even said it was an Asiatic or an Asian language or an African language. No one said anything like that, a truly alien language to them. I will now call your attention to 3 points. The voice is termed by one witness harsh rather than shrill. It is represented by 2 others to have been quick and unequal, no words, no sounds resembling words, or by any witnesses mentioned as distinguishable. I know not, continued Dupin, what impression I may have made so far upon your own understanding, but I do not hesitate to say that legitimate deductions, even from this portion of the testimony, the portion respecting the gruff and shrill voices, are in themselves sufficient to engender a suspicion which should give direction to all further progress in the investigation of the mystery. I said legitimate deductions, but my meaning is not thus fully expressed. I designed to imply the deductions are the sole proper ones, and that the suspicion arises inevitably from them as a single result. What the suspicion is, however, I will not say just yet. I merely wish you to bear in mind that with myself it was sufficiently forcible to give a definite form, a certain tendency to my inquiries in the chamber. Let us now transport ourselves in fancy to this chamber. I'm going to go ahead and end it pretty soon, y'all. I want to give y'all a little bit of time to work on the homework. So I'm going to stop it here in just a few moments. Let us now transport ourselves in fancy to this chamber. What shall we first seek here? The means of egress employed by the murderers is not too much to say that neither of us believe in preternatural events. So, how crazy they got into this place, we don't always let go of possible evil events. Madame and Mademoiselle L'Espagne were not destroyed by spirits or ghosts. The doers of the deed were material and escaped materially. They were physical, so they had to have a physical escape route. Then how? Fortunately, there is but one mode of reasoning upon the point, and that mode must lead us to a definite decision. Let us examine each by each the possible means of egress. It is clear that the assassins were in the room where Mademoiselle L'Espagne was found, or at least in the room adjoining. When the party ascended the stairs, it is then only from those 2 apartments that we have to seek issues. The police have laid bare the floors, the ceilings, and the masonry of the walls in every direction. No secret issues could have escaped their vigilance, so there was no secret ways to leave. But not trusting to their eyes, I examined with my own. There were then no secret issues. Both doors leading from the rooms into the passage were securely locked, with the keys inside. Let us turn to the chimneys. These, although of ordinary width for some 8 or 10 feet, above the hearths, will not admit, throughout their extent, the body of a large cat. So the chimneys, took me a second there, the chimneys, while really large in the very beginning, close to the fireplace, they slowly taper off to this small little section where not even a cat could get through. The impossibility of egress or entrance. By means already stated being this absolute, we are reduced to the windows. Though those of the front room, no one could have escaped without notice from the crowd in the street. So we know they must have left by the windows. The murderers must have passed then through those of the back room. Now brought to this conclusion in so unequivocal a manner as we are, it is not our part as reasoners to reject it on account of apparent impossibilities. It is only left for us to prove that these apparent impossibilities are in reality not such. So we need to prove the impossible is in fact possible. Why would it be impossible for the murderer to escape from the windows in the back room? Remember, how high are they?
8.
They're on the 4th floor. That's generally speaking, if each floor is roughly around 10 to 12 feet at most, we can assume that this is going to be roughly around 40 to about 46, 48 feet at most in the air. You can't really survive that without being broken. That's heck. If you think, remember, the older lady was found in the backyard with her right side crushed, probably from being thrown out the window or something like that. So we need to prove that the impossible, that these people, these murderers, escaped from the top room, from the windows somehow. That's what we're going to leave off tomorrow for today, because I still want to give you some time to work on your homework in class, at least give you a little bit of start up on that one. Tomorrow, we're going to be breaking down those together. I'm going to show you what I expected of you after taking them up. So those of you online, make sure that you are completing that homework. I assigned it yesterday. Make sure that you get that done.